Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Today's offering is called Bringing Self-Care into Your Practice Through Somatic Awareness. Jennifer presented part one about a month ago, and so we are now talking about part two. So I'm Cara Dina Sale with the Community Technical Assistance Center at New York University's McSilver Institute. And again, I'd like to welcome you to part two today of Bringing Self-Care into Your Practice Through Somatic Awareness with Jennifer Axinn-Weiss. Today's webinar will focus on applying somatic-based awareness for self-care to incorporate before, during, and after sessions. Thanks again for joining us, and thank you, Jennifer, for all of your amazing work. Jennifer is an expressive arts and dynamic play specialist, also has done a lot of sand play, and an educator and a certified pediatric hypnosis practitioner. So without further ado, I will pass it on to you, Jennifer, and thank you everyone for being here today.
Thank you, Cara, and thank you, McSilver Institute, for inviting me here today. And I want to share my intention is my wish to offer these tools for you, which may not be our natural way of working, mostly because we've been shifted out of our awareness with ourselves. And this is a way of practicing that. And so we're going to begin in a very simple way. I would like to also share that at the centerpiece for all of the moments of time is a grounding practice, is the capacity to shift into where you feel most supported. And so in the seminar today, we'll have a chance, we'll invite you into your own process of awareness of where you are. And even right now, I'm going to invite you in to shift by letting go of what happened earlier today and what will happen after the seminar, and to sort of just be in the state of more present moment, into present time together. And for me, it's about going into a place of not knowing how. I know I'm setting the framework, but sort of just being in that place and building a greater self-trust. And how that happens is shifting our awareness to where maybe, for example, you feel held. So right now I'm inviting you in to practice this idea, this feeling of the chair or the seat beneath you, and how you may be standing even. So using my words or this practice in the way that you need. And if you come home with a few tools, I'm very grateful. That would be great. So I think I'm keeping it as simple as possible, but these are practices we'll use in the next hour. This is a moment of self-care that you even arrived. I would like to also acknowledge that moments in time where we have arrived for ourselves, celebrating the small wins. We often overlook those. So the felt sense, maybe connecting yourself with a moment where you felt a sense of greater empowerment and bringing that in right now. Maybe you noticed you're sitting higher. Maybe your breath is changing. But just notice the components of where you feel the groundedness underneath you. And it's called grounding. And the idea even is that we can feel the earth support, gravity, maybe rootedness, maybe even using our imagination. Part of my practice has been built on using the imagination, using active imagination, a Jungian term, in service of building greater regulation in the nervous system. And we can use these practices in a simple way throughout the day. So just to orient you, so this is part of it, is showing you that there's a framework today, maybe noticing how orienting can be helpful. So we're beginning with that practice. I'll share some of the inspiration behind my wish to make these tools available. one being also your good work. Also, this is an invitation for somatic awareness, building your personal container that you can use using resourcing and anchoring. And you can read what it is to be resourced and finding resources through body awareness. There's anchoring with new associations. Again, the inspiration. Oh, I added that twice. I didn't mean to. Building your own practice and how that can help integrate the brain states, bringing in larger awareness, and then applying these before and after and during sessions. So my inspiration came out of my own dysregulation. I trained as a somatic experiencing practitioner. I've been using these practices to help those I work with. But for many years, I realized I wasn't connected in my physical body, and I would get into situations where I didn't even know my own boundary. So I'd work with 10 children at a time in different healing arts programs that we were doing. And I realized how I was working with dysregulated children and how I became dysregulated because I didn't know where I ended. I would kind of get brought into their story, their dysregulation, and I didn't have the grounding for myself. I'm inspired to share because I know all the good work that's happening now, and I'm feeling for all the children, teens who have been in this time, and for all of us in this time of overwhelm. So how can we be strong in the midst of overwhelming events, which happen throughout our day? I was walking down the street today, preparing, and I was laughing because I heard the sound of sirens, and I heard like trucks driving by. And for a sensitive person, those things can feel overwhelming. I used one of my tools, which is laughter yoga, and I just started laughing because it became funny. I was actually making a recording. And so I advocate for you to continue using the tools that you have, but I would like to offer some other ones. Yeah, so that was a huge component, is realizing that I needed to be aware, and I still practice this, and I still need, often we share what we need to learn ourselves. But before sessions, in the middle of sessions and after, there were times where I'd feel dysregulated after a client, and I wouldn't know how to hold the ground. And there are methods that you can hold the ground when we use alternative ways. We make space. So this practice is also about making space from what arises. We'll be able to identify a place where there's groundedness and sort of be aware of where we're activated too. So this is a way that you can work and offer it for others. Again, this is an invitation for you each to understand or continue to understand your own levels of activation and settling. And what we optimally want is to build the capacity to it's called greater vagal tone, to actually let the system go through a sympathetic, activated response and then come to greater settling. So it's through these tools of awareness that we are able to first acknowledge what's happening when we notice our heartbeat is happening, beating fast. Often we've been disconnected culturally in the society. We've been disconnected from knowing, and these tools, I think, should be available for children in the school system to be able to acknowledge. Part of the greater gain of this work is greater self-knowing, greater connection, and greater understanding of how we feel. So I invite you to sort of get a sense, and maybe for future, or just take note sometimes when you felt over stimulated, you felt on. We don't always have the luxury to change our outer environment, but we have the power of maybe choosing first to acknowledge that things are overwhelming, we can create space by simply calling our own boundary and naming that. So as I shared before, I want to just describe what the terms are when we think about resourcing. It's finding internal or external supports that provide greater capacity. That's my definition. It's finding friends in our mind's eye. These can be done through the imaginal field. So imagining friends and supporters and people who have cared for you, and maybe even imagining them there with you. Imagining colors that are connecting to states of being, and that's what we'll call anchoring, is making associations with a color. So the inspiration about this, the incentive is in anchoring, is to give yourself simple color associations or I am statements, affirmations, or ways that you can access these states more easily. So anchoring is a neuro-linguistic programming technique that's used that makes links between those external or imaginal stimulus to an internal state or emotional kind of state. And that can be then elicited through remembering the anchors. So if you think about what your favorite color is, it's a simple thing, but you can draw on that throughout the day. And that can create an association. So I will advance the slide and explain a little bit further. But first, I want to call attention to the idea of a boundary awareness. And now I'm going to invite you in to feel and maybe state, this is my space. And maybe feel the space around you. And just declare what it is. These are practices I can use, I incorporate into sessions with those I work with. They're based on somatic experiencing practices I've learned. And I just use those. But the idea is that maybe you give yourself a hug and you say, this is me. And this can be a resource that you can use as part of your practice. So any ones that I share with you, you may want to try right now or as I progress through the slides. So this is me. You might say, this is me. This is my own thing that I do. I state this is me, and this is not me. So what's happening outside? And this way of orienting ourselves in time and space, and we can do that with time too, with orienting ourselves in relationship to others, can have profound possibility. I'm sharing with you in a kind of fundamental way. But if you can think about ways that this can extend, the implications can be big. What is yours? What is not yours? So again, we're now moving into what it is to be resourced. And we think about being able to have the capacity to be bigger than life events. This is my way of understanding. So a way to identify ourselves as steady, as confident, connected, anchored. I use a lot of these ideas about being consistent, curious, having self-compassion. So being gentle with ourselves can be a way. So being resourced, all of these things can serve those we work with because we can model this for others. Understanding that we can grow our ability to stay in regulation. Understanding our own needs. So we think about what Dan Siegel has talked about by the window of tolerance. This is an idea of like what would be the optimal place for us. We don't always have that choice. Sometimes we get pushed beyond our window of tolerance. So how can we build our capacity? And finding our internal resources can be helpful. Again, repetition is very important in this practice. So, oh, I skipped. So I want to speak a little bit about anchoring, because this has to do with neuroplasticity a bit. And it's about how neurons that fire together wire together. So this is Donald Hebb's work, I think from the 40s. This idea, it's very Pavlovian. So remember the Pavlov's model of a dog receiving food and the bell goes off. So when we think about the bell becoming the anchor, think about the color. We can bring the internal state in. So even these images. And I want to invite you to think about using senses for this support. So maybe you use aromatherapy to help you. That helps with the olfactory, the memory. That can, I mean, I can go off on each one of these, but using the senses. I didn't put food in here, and I thought about it after. I thought food can help us regulate, thinking about it, the joy factor of it, thinking about events. So I want to invite you to remember a time as you prepare for the practice we'll do. Think about a time where you felt yourself in a flow state. I'm also inviting you in to think about using affirmations as a way to support this. And this can be included in a somatic practice. So if you think about or feel into this idea of even saying, I am relaxed, and just notice how powerful the word is and how it affects you, what it's doing. And thinking about the power of the words you can choose as part of your toolkit. So maybe even walking into a space and saying, I'm relaxed, or I am resilient, or whatever it is that's helpful. For me, I've used the word I am unshakable, and I'm victorious, or I've had about 10 different words I've used. I put Primal Trust as a resource. It's a program I've been involved with, and Kathleen King has used some of these affirmations to great effect. Other things I have in the resource are things that I've worked with, some more so than others. But anyway, so thinking about fragrances, thinking about other sensations. I'm holding this weighted, textured kind of pillow, beanbag. I guess it's a barley bag. And so what resources do you use? I'm feeling the texture of this. So this helps my system and I can feel it. It's very calming. I can put my hands on my face. That soothes the system. I'll be nerdy. It brings theta wave activity in. Imagining this, imagining somebody putting their hand on your forehead, putting your hand on the back of your head, your neck. There are other resources I've named too. So thinking about what your personal resources may be. And the sense is that you can do small incremental moments like this, and then you can spend longer periods of time. And it's not necessary that you need to be seated to do this. In fact, I work with people who don't feel like being seated is what they want to be. They want to move. So this is also an invitation to use some of these things and follow what your body might want to do. So just noticing this is creating spaciousness to let there be room to unpack what other areas might be feeling dysregulated. And if you notice on some of the graphics, and I have to say, I'm sharing some of my own art, some has been provided, but the illustrations are ones that I have made. So I am using the example, you can see the star here. So this star is showing maybe where there's a place of feeling more settled. And that can be used in a very powerful way. And I've had this little cloud on her head. And that's something that I have experienced. I've had experience of sensation in my head. And I work with that. So I do what's called pendulate. I meet that place inside where I feel regulated and greater ease and groundedness. I can feel myself, and you might just notice where you are feeling a sense of greater ease. So this whole seminar is kind of a practice opportunity. So we're possibly building new habits, making more spaciousness. So I now invite you to share what resources that you may have. They could be memories, moments in time, and you can spend more time with them. I'm just suggesting, because last time it was mentioned that, some of this feels like it could be a luxury, but I'm suggesting that it can be something you include in your day, that it may not require going on a special training or retreat, that this is an idea. And you can have mini retreats. I always laugh and I say, you can go on holiday in your mind and you can be as detailed as you wish. And you can do that in 5 minutes. And so again, using active imagination in service of regulation. Even imagining that beach holiday. So if anybody has anything particular that can be helpful, because I imagine you each have already created your own practices to prepare for your work each day, and you found your own resources, and maybe you take a weekend and go hiking and all of those things. You can bring the hiking trip back with you. What is the felt sense from that hiking trip? How can that serve you in your week, during the week, when you're seeing so many people? What are the colors? What's the light? What was the light like? Card, do you see anything that would be helpful for me to respond to?
Yes. So I was chatting with asking people about the words that they use earlier, and some said, I am safe, I am loved. Someone said they are worthy of self-compassion, I'm worthy of kindness. Then somebody says, I do box breathing sometimes using counts of 4 and kind of grounding herself. And then after that, they sit and imagine a safe place, which is a treehouse.
Oh, just even hearing that, right? Yes, using the sense of safe place is very important, to have that sense of greater ease. I've often incorporated that in. So I think having those resources and those words, actually, it's funny, those same words, I am safe. I often say that people want to hear these basic things. I'm okay, even if things don't feel okay. That might be a fundamental one that I love working with. Or, I am seen, I see myself. So sometimes we haven't been modeled being seen. So this is a way of attuning to our own needs. So again, I use, internal family systems, but that's not required. The idea that we see ourselves, we see what's arising. We learn, a lot of us have not learned how to speak to ourselves in the most self-compassionate way. So how are we undoing some of those old patterns? We
Mhm.
can name the old patterns and we can move into new ones. And that takes sort of a retraining process. It can take repetition. So if there's old rumination, and rumination I'm just naming, is a stress response. So to go back to your words and the inspiration around those. So what words we share with ourselves are, is a, are, it's a huge thing.
Some other people are sharing some amazing ways to resource. Inez says, my resource is remembering the garden at my aunt's house.
Mm,
Charlene says, stretching, singing favorite songs, putting the lights off, and deep breathing. Kim says, I feel peace and a beautiful flow of green and gold light coming from my heart.
and I love also the idea of humming, singing to yourself. So that's, there are some tools that are used in somatic experiencing in general, but singing to ourselves is a way of us knowing ourselves. And it also serves the nervous system. And I remember growing up and singing with my sister, and that got us into a new state of being. So, yeah, using the various senses and ones that I haven't named. So,
Mhm. So many great ways that you all are connecting to yourselves. Somebody said, I find joy and peace when I decorate and rearrange my house. Someone said candles. I like candles. Julie says, I recall favorite movie lines and scenes that remind me of how comforted I feel when watching them. Amanda lights candles. Shauna finds joy and peace when decorating or rearranging her home. Lynn says, I am beloved and loving. I am radiant. Those are the words that you use, Lynn. Amazing. Candles and incense are great, says Ramika. Lynn, watching the birds at the feeder outside my window with the cat on my lap. Oh, wow. Rebecca says, I jump on a mini trampoline in between sessions.
oh, so you all have this going on already. So much of this. This is additional. This is like a little extra. But so even noticing how you feel when we hear Carol share these, like all of a sudden there's this levity that happens. We're drawing an intentional awareness to this. And so noticing how these can be used, and like I could just hear you share that list forever.
I could. They keep coming in. They're so beautiful. Thank you for sharing.
So this may be a shift, but it's not, because I am sort of inviting you into resourcing. And one of the ways that has been beneficial for me is to understand the larger learning. And it might be a jump, but it's not, because this is about resourcing. And this might be a little bit more top down, but it's also about making meaning, which is a way of orienting ourselves. So, especially if we've been experiencing ongoing stress, finding our intention within it is a way of sort of grounding and connecting with our optimal selves, I call it, the state of our wellness, our flow. So for me, part of my purpose is to help support others in knowing themselves and finding their own empowerment. And so when I tap into this purpose, it gives me this energy flow through my system. I also understand my own journey has been in service of research. I call my own journey my research. My own healing journey has been my research, so that I can provide some of the gifts of what I've learned with others. So the meaning making part is really helpful. And I like the quote by Viktor Frankl, and I've kind of abbreviated a little bit, but in some ways, suffering ceases to be suffering at the moment it finds meaning. So I'm inviting you in to kind of think about, maybe it's already something you've done, but what's the greater learning that you may be receiving from a challenging moment in time? And what is your inspiration for the work that you're doing? And remembering that can really help the system orient and recharge. So I'm just naming a few things that are a little top down, but it's also a way of orienting. So you might even want to include those in the chat, whether we'll get to them, but at least I'll have a sense of some of the ways that you're feeling or thinking about this. And part of my practice has been to help support others in remembering or accessing that self-knowing and purpose. So I'm going to name something that was addressed last time in the chat. We're talking about intergenerational, cultural, societal traumas that have happened. And also knowing in the boundary awareness practices is knowing that we're bigger than our stories. And often we have received sort of energetic, I call them templates, energetic resonances that have been passed down from our grandparents. And Resmaa Menakem's work also speaks about this, and that's in the resource. There's another book I mentioned, and some of these I've worked with more diligently, but the growing awareness is that we are unpacking culturally these larger paradigms, and that somatic awareness brings us into knowing these things in context. And a somatic experience allows us to build this practice of building a greater groundedness, a greater container, makes room for some of this material that is arising to have spaciousness so that our systems can manage to integrate or digest some of it. Maybe not digest isn't the right word, because often I use active imagination, and I might say, okay, so you've been holding this thing. If you look on the slide, the current figure, the triangle represents the groundedness, and she's put down the energetic template. Sometimes we learn and we speak to that energetic template and we ask how it might have tried to serve us. So for me, for this, I just shared the idea that we can make spaciousness to see what is happening using the imaginal field. So now I invite us to go into the practice of shifting from thinking to feeling again, which I've kind of been weaving through. And this can be a big relief because, again, as I shared, the ruminating mind can be a stress response. And often we live in a time where we have been engaged in this part of our experience, trying to figure it out. And so this is about making space from trying to figure it out. So right now I invite you maybe to take a few minutes and just shift into your own internal space. And this is a practice, a guided experience of imagining yourself before your session and shifting into the feeling and feeling yourself in your chair or standing. And often I include a sun. This is sort of a little embellished, but a sun is helping us orient in space and can provide inspiration and protection in the sun shower. Feeling also yourself connected with the chair, maybe experiencing yourself as a tree, perhaps, if you want to use this image. If it doesn't work for you, that's fine too, but feeling the rootedness of your inner tree, rooted down to the center of the earth and connecting to the earth and feeling into the gravity holding you. And I like thanking the earth. Reminding me about this is also feeling that sense of gratitude. That can also expand. And noticing where you feel that greater ease in your system. And maybe identifying it with a shape or a color, a density. And knowing that that's a touchstone that you can access. What's the quality of that? Grounded sensation. And wherever you are in relationship to that felt sense is fine. It's a practice to feel. So wherever you are in relationship to that, but just noticing that as you become more curious, you may have more of an understanding of that. And maybe noticing a sense of your breathing. And you may even look around the room. This is a practice called orienting, looking to your left and looking at your horizon line and just looking, and maybe orienting in time to say what happened earlier or a year ago is over. Looking through that horizon line. And now I invite you to notice what may be activated as you approach the session. And notice as you scan your system, just feeling into what is coming up for care. So one framework may be like internal family system, where the bigger container of you is the adult self. If that's not familiar for you, that's fine. But noticing what is coming up for care, what's the quality? Is there a sensation on your chest? Or just, I'll leave it open for you to explore. But know that you can shift and make room. So you can shift back into that place of support and groundedness, greater ease. And you can just take note of what feels dysregulated. And you can go back and forth, which is called pendulation. And these terms, again, are on the Trauma Institute website. Some of those, I think there's even a printout. So I invite you to go back to where you feel grounded and to be able to use this awareness as you enter into your session. It's a shift, and maybe it takes 1 minute. But the idea is that if you can just take a breath, have a color, and I'm imagining you already have your practices to do this, but this is adding a level of a somatic awareness. I mentioned heart coherence, which has to do with maybe putting your hand over your heart and on your solar plexus. And if you want to know more about it, it's called heart math. It's creating a congruence between the breath and your heartbeat. So creating greater spaciousness. So having that available to move towards your session, I'm going to go now into the session. And knowing that healing happens in co-regulation, and that it happens when a new response can be present, a co-regulated, kind of modeled regulation. So last time I spoke about our voice, using our own voices to help bring that greater regulated state in. So as you're approaching the client you're working with, maybe you have your own sensations and your own feelings, and just noticing that you can be a proxy sometimes. So following your own kind of instinct as well, and sometimes naming that. I have these seated figures here, but you may notice as your client enters the space, you may have your own impulse to move, but you might not do that right away. You just might name that for yourself and just sort of share that out loud. So sometimes you can share these things to do together. And maybe a client comes in, they want to share immediately what's happened, like a child who hurts their knee is waiting for their mother to start crying. And it may be a shift for them, but maybe introducing the idea that maybe we can start with just some simple things. And that can mean that they move back and forth if they've come in and they're dysregulated, but inviting them into a more a felt sense of if you're noticing dysregulation, maybe just starting off. I often invite clients to sort of throw a ball, or I have these things called Smovie rings that are used. Peter Levine uses them to tell their story by moving. So everything, I have seated figures, it's funny, but I'm naming that because that's kind of that big spaciousness, but noticing and offering them a place where they can move while they tell the story. They can be in the space. And I invite you during your session to kind of feel what feels grounded inside of you. And maybe you notice again, I put the star as that grounded place, and I put just example of a shape, and the shape might be different for is different for the client than the provider. But the idea is that there's places of regulation and places of dysregulation. And maybe with time, you can sort of offer methods that may not be speaking about the most activated moments, which is often what happens for me. I've had to share with clients. They've come in and they want to tell me the biggest thing first. And I invite them to just take a breath. And I say, I'm really interested, but would you like to just spend a moment just arriving in the space with me? And if it means that you'd just like to move around and arrive that way, but it's a shift of making and calling attention to that bigger spaciousness. So you don't always have the chance to use some of the practices you've had before the session, but I just call to you as a reminder that you can access that. Often we get involved in what's happening with the client. It's also knowing that you can have your own space within. And so you don't have to get pulled into the dysregulated energy. It could be like a hypo response. So there could be sluggishness. It's just a matter of being curious about what you're noticing. And you may kind of know that you feel the sense inside of you. And you might invite, if you're feeling that and the client isn't mentioning it, maybe you can invite them and say, I'm noticing that I have had my own, I'm having this feeling that I want to move. Is that interesting for you? Would you like, not in those words, but would you like to sort of shift? And then from there, you can kind of follow your own intuitive. This is kind of cultivating your own awareness around your own kind of antenna, being a somatic detective. I also believe in imagining the child as healthy and happy and thriving. This is a big thing, even if they're in a big journey. And I think holding that space of envisioning them in that way can be a great benefit. Even if you know it's shared or not shared, is holding that vision. It helps everybody's nervous system to imagine them in a place of wholeness. Imagine them in wholeness. Are there any questions? I'm wondering at this point. I know we have a few minutes. I'm going to go over the after, the reflection of the session. So, resourcing after. So again, returning to that idea of your own awareness. Again, we want to be modeling kind of a regulated state of, it's not always accessible, and that's what this practice is bringing more capacity. So after the session, you may feel your own need to move and shake and jump and whatever you need to do. Often I feel I need to move the air. I run a fan. I go outside. I imagine you have your own practices. Another component I've come to understand is that there's nothing to fix. It's a matter of being able to be with. So again, I'm back to this other slide. I just want to mention that by making spaciousness and naming what is more grounded and then naming the activation, that can make spaciousness. And by making color associations or shapes, it makes room, that they are not their activation, that things feel activated, but that's not them. And maybe they might want to know that too. So how are we with our own discomfort might be a question. And how can we build greater tolerance about feeling into what is uncomfortable? Because that's the foundation as well. Feeling into what might not be so comfortable and incrementally touching the edges of that, so as not to feel a need to have overwhelm. So during the session, the client might go to the edge or they might want to dive in, but it's about making spaciousness for them to have greater room. So to go to resources and maybe bring some greater awareness that you can refer back to through the session, reminding them of those moments of their own empowerment. So a lot of the things you can share with the clients you work with. So understanding that if you're holding on to something that's not yours from the session, seeing how you might work with that by just naming it. I say washing hands because the water can be really soothing. It works on many levels, but it can be helpful in bringing sort of more spaciousness. So I invite you to just check in to see your own awareness around feeling groundedness, your own breath, your own activation, and how maybe you imagine working with yourself in moments of activation. So we repair in connection, and I think that can happen, or in nature, or it can be with animals, it can be with moments in time. So finding ways in which we can bring that connection. I invite us to imagine nature, or be better yet, be in nature. So I bring these tools with you, and I just see maybe ways in which you might like to incorporate them into your work and your days. So thank you for letting me share. I have some resources. Some of them I'm even more keenly familiar with, but I'm naming some things that might be helpful. Naming is a huge method to help us make spaciousness from those things that we encounter. So I just, in the sake of naming. So
Thank
please feel
you so
free to
much.
share any
Yes,
comment.
thank you. Hi folks, my name is Diane and I am stepping in for Kara as we close out. I did just see something in the chat box come in about getting the list. So the slides you can certainly use as a resource. They will be posted on our website within the next 2 to 3 business days. So please visit our website, ctacny.org. And again, any questions that you all might have, please feel free to put those in the chat box now. In the meantime, Jennifer, we could just go through some questions. We had one come in about any suggestions that you might have for safe ways to help young kids, primarily ages 3 to 6, unleash those big feelings that you were talking about, and specifically redirecting their urge to throw things, for example.
Okay, so the first thing I want to name is the power of naming. And first asking them, I love doing this. So I would say to a child, I might have shared this before. How big are your feelings? Like, just show me, are they this big? And really acknowledging it feels so big. And asking them on a scale from 1 to 10, how big they feel. And asking them maybe to draw how big they feel and draw the quality, and ask them really bring it out. So are they colored? What's the shape of it? What's the color of it? And then see how they might want to work with it in the imaginal space. What would you like to do with the big feelings? Where do they exist in your body? Are you carrying those big feelings with you? Let's talk to the big feel, just sort of making bigger spaciousness and letting them know that they are not their feelings, that their feelings are coming up, and maybe seeing they can, that's the imaginal space. You can do anything. So also naming their urge to throw objects. So actually joining with them. I'm so glad you're asking, because it gives me a chance. Joining with them to let them throw the object, but like actually repeating that impulse that they have. So they're showing you their impulse of what they want to be doing. So maybe even making small objects and letting them throw those objects, but making them safe objects, like, stuffy pillows, or and just sort of honoring them, because that's their wisdom. Yeah. Hope that's helpful. So I love this youth who holds an ice cube to calm and ground herself. So this is a natural impulse. So it's really about honoring those impulses that a child might have. I had a child who was biting, so we really started like making sounds of biting sounds, and not to do anything else with that, not to shame them, or actually to honor them. This is an impulse they have. And sort of say, well, let's do this safely. Let's just do this. So we would make the growling sound until that impulse found its own resolution.
Oh, thank you so much, Jennifer. Uh, that really sort of puts a different perspective into things, right? Because I think when we talk about young kids throwing things and whatnot, there's sort of this punitive thing. So really, as you said, honoring that, recognizing that, and working through with them till we get to a different stage. Thank you. So I am cognizant of time. Folks, if you have any other questions, please put those into the chat box. But I know that you all have places that you need to get back to. So as we close out, Jennifer, if you can forward the slides, I do want to highlight for folks that we have upcoming events. So there is an upcoming event slide. We have 2 events coming up in September: Surviving Trafficking, a conversation with a therapist and a survivor, on September 26th. We also have a live screening and discussion of implicit bias. What is it and why it matters? Also on September 30th. And in October, we have an offering on supporting youth who exhibit problematic sexual behavior. I see the resources slide is up right now for folks who will be able to download all the slides, including the resources. I didn't put it into the chat box because the hyperlink gets lost, so you can certainly go to those. Here's the slide with our upcoming events. And on our last and final slide, I do want to say thank you to Jennifer. This is the second part, so thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom. And also thank you to our audience for attending today's webinar. As we close out, you may have seen that our coordinator has put in a link to a short survey. Please fill that out. It definitely helps to inform future offerings as well. It'll also probably pop up on your screen as you close out. So again, I encourage you to visit our website, ctacny.org, for past trainings, including part 1 and part 2, which will be up on the website again in the next 2 to 3 business days. If you have any questions, concerns, please contact us at ctac.info@nyu.edu. And on behalf of CTAC and our presenter, thank you for joining us today, and have a great rest of your day.